My name is Vork. And no, before you ask, I do not have a last name. Where I come from, last names are considered a sign of overconfidence. You earn a last name only if you survive long enough to embarrass yourself at least 3 times in front of a council. I have only done it twice. So. Just Vork. I am, by profession, a signal analyst for the Outer Monitoring Division of the Gorvan Collective. That sounds very impressive. What it actually means is that I sit in a room the size of a closet, surrounded by screens that glow the color of dying stars, and I listen to the noise of the universe. Most of the time, the universe is boring. Most of the time, the universe sounds like static, like breathing, like the long, patient silence of rocks drifting through empty nothing. And then, one cycle, the universe did something it had absolutely no business doing. It sent me a website. Not a signal. Not a coded burst transmission. Not even a distress beacon from some poor pilot who flew too close to a gas giant. A website. With a loading bar. And advertisements. And, I am not making this up, a pop-up asking me if I wanted to subscribe to something called a newsletter. I stared at my screen for what I can only describe as a humiliating amount of time. My colleague, Prissa, who sits 2 closets down from me and who has the most aggressively calm face I have ever encountered on any life form in any star system, leaned over my shoulder and looked at the screen. She said, and I quote, That was it. Just, Then she went back to her desk. Prissa is a woman of very few words and absolutely zero panic. I respect her deeply and also find her deeply unsettling. The website was from a planet called Earth. Now, Earth had been on our watch list for about 200 of their years. Not because they were dangerous. Oh, no. They were on the watch list because they were, quote from the official Gorvan assessment report, aggressively unpredictable in ways that do not follow any known behavioral model. Which, in scientific language, means nobody had any idea what they were going to do next, and that made everyone extremely nervous. But here is the thing about Earth. The thing that nobody in the collective talks about at official meetings but everybody whispers about in corridors. Earth had figured out how to put its entire civilization onto something they called the Internet. Every thought. Every argument. Every piece of recorded history, art, music, and an absolutely staggering volume of content that I do not have the clearance to describe in this report. All of it. Floating freely in open space accessible digital transmission. No encryption. No access codes. No, are you a certified intelligence before reading this? Nothing. They just put it all out there. The website that reached me was titled, and I am reading this directly from my notes, Top 10 Reasons Why Humans Would Beat Aliens in a Fight, number 7 will shock you. I read it 3 times. The first time because I thought I had mistranslated something. The second time because I was certain there was a joke I was missing. The third time because I had accepted that there was no joke, and the horror needed to fully absorb into my brain like moisture into dry soil. Number 7, for the record, was, We Don't Know When to Quit. That was it. That was the entire entry. No elaboration. No scientific data. No tactical breakdown. Just that sentence, sitting there like a small, incredibly confident rock that had no idea how large the cliff it was sitting on actually was. I filed an immediate report to my supervisor, Commander Drev Soluan. Drev is a large, gray, 6-limbed being who has been doing this job for 400 years and who responds to most things with a slow blink and a sound like distant thunder. I sent him the link. I sat back in my chair. I waited. 3 minutes later, his voice came through my communication panel. Vork. Yes, Commander. Have you read all of it? I have, sir. A pause. A long pause. The kind of pause that has texture to it, that you could reach out and touch if you tried. Pull the full archive, he said. Everything. Their history files, their science files, their conflict records, everything. Sir, that is approximately 4.6 billion individual documents. I know. Another pause. Vork, he said, slowly, the way you speak when you are trying to stay very calm and are not entirely succeeding. Why do they have a category called, things humans did that should have killed them but didn't? I looked at my screen. I looked at the archive index, already loading, already filling column after column with titles and dates and entries and links. Sir, I said quietly. I think that might be the most important question anyone in this collective has ever asked. The archive took 6 hours to fully download. 6 hours. For context, the last time we pulled a full civilization archive, it was for the Mechthari Dominion, and their entire recorded history fit into something roughly the size of what humans call a thumb drive. Neat, organized, indexed by era, cross-referenced by event. Clean. Efficient. Exactly what a civilization that had been carefully managing its public records for 3,000 years looks like. The humans had 600 times more data. And approximately 0 organizational systems that made any sense to anyone who had not grown up inside whatever fever dream produced them. Prissa came and stood in the doorway of my closet. She looked at the progress bar. She looked at me. She said, again, but this time it was a different kind of HM. A longer one. One with weight behind it. They have a category, I told her, called, things that are technically food but probably shouldn't be. She blinked once. How many entries? 4,600, and growing. The archive is still loading. She stood there for another moment. Then she pulled a chair from her own closet, placed it next to mine, sat down, and did not leave for the next 11 hours. That was the most emotion I had ever seen Prissa display. I considered it a significant event. We started, as any reasonable analyst would, with the conflict records. Partly because that is protocol. Partly because Commander Drev had sent a follow-up message that said, simply, tell me how many wars, and I needed an answer before morning cycle. The answer, for the record, was, a lot. An almost creative amount. Wars over land, water, religion, political theory, succession rights, trade routes, a specific body of salt water that several groups wanted simultaneously, and, this is real, a bucket. There was a war over a bucket. It lasted about an hour. 11 people died. The bucket was returned. Nobody involved ever fully explained themselves, and somehow that felt correct. But here is the part that made both Prissa and me go very quiet, in the way that you go quiet when something stops being funny and starts being something else entirely. Something that sits at the back of your skull and hums. They kept surviving. Every single time. Every catastrophe, every collapse, every war that should have ended them, every plague, every famine, every period of history that their own scholars described using words like, unprecedented disaster, and, somehow they continued. They rebuilt. They adapted. They did not do it gracefully. They did not do it according to any plan. Half the time they seemed to do it entirely by accident, fueled by stubbornness and something their philosophers kept calling hope, which, from what I can translate, appears to be the act of believing something good will happen despite all available evidence suggesting otherwise. I found one entry in their historical archive. A small one. A quote from one of their ancient writers, a man named Cato Virellus, not famous, not well known, just a person who had lived through a siege of his city and written down what it felt like afterward. The quote had been translated into 30 different human languages over the centuries and shared millions of times on their internet with no explanation, just the words themselves. He wrote, "We were supposed to fall. We noted this. We fell. Then, apparently, we got back up, because here I am writing this, which means someone handed me a pen, which means someone found paper, which means someone built a fire to see by, which means we are, against all reasonable expectation, still here." Prissa read it twice. Then she said, "That's not a war record. No, I said. That's a personality trait. Yes, I said. We sat with that for a while. Commander Drev called at the 14th hour. His voice was different now. Not calm. Not the distant thunder tone. Something quieter, something that in a being of lesser experience might have been called unease, but in Drev sounded more like the careful, measured recalibration of someone updating a very old assumption. The biological data, he said. Tell me the part about pain tolerance. I found the file. Their nervous systems, I read aloud, register pain similarly to most carbon-based species. However, humans demonstrate a documented and repeatable ability to continue functioning at high physical and psychological stress levels that would incapacitate the majority of known sentient species. Multiple recorded instances exist of humans completing complex tasks, including running, climbing, navigating, and making strategic decisions, while experiencing what their own medical literature classifies as severe trauma. Silence. Drev, I said carefully, there is a subcategory. Read it. It is titled, Things Humans Did While on Fire. The silence this time had a completely different quality. It was the silence of a very experienced, very senior military commander doing rapid, quiet arithmetic in his head about something he had previously filed under, not a concern. Prissa leaned back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling. She said, in the flattest voice I have ever heard from any living creature, we have been watching this planet for 200 years and nobody escalated this file. Correct, I said. Because they seemed non-threatening. Correct. Because they were mostly arguing with each other. Correct. Vork, she said, still looking at the ceiling, absolutely still, they were not arguing because they were weak. They were arguing because they were practicing. I closed the file. I opened a new report document. I titled it, Urgent, Priority 1, Full Collective Review Required, and in the subject line, I typed the only sentence that felt accurate, honest, and complete. We may have misread the humans. Drev's voice came back one last time, low and even. Send it. Send everything. And Vork. Sir. Put the kettle on, whatever that means. I found it in their archive. Apparently they say it before something long and difficult begins. A pause. It seemed appropriate. I sent the report. The archive was still loading. Somewhere on that small, loud, thoroughly unreasonable planet, a human was presumably doing something that should have been impossible, for reasons nobody had properly explained, fueled by stubbornness and bad decisions and that untranslatable, irrational, infuriating thing called hope. And somehow, I had a feeling, they were going to be just fine.